Good afternoon. This is the Black Man Read Aloud, the Black Man Who Reads Aloud. This is Joe Hall. And again, we're coming up to Sunday's program on the 15th of August at 1 o'clock. Reparations towards repatriation, which will be a Zoom, Facebook event, internationally focused um, panel, along with entertainment. I hope you can join us. Today, we are continuing our journey into the voices or the recollections of our ancestors from the Federal Writers Project. We are in North Carolina's slave narratives. Today, we are reading the recollections of a 90-year-old Andrew Boone who lived in Wakefield County, North Carolina on the Harris Farm. I'm going to read these words exactly as they're written um, from the Federal Writers Project on Andrew Boone, his recollections. I've been living in these backer barns 15 years. I built this little shelter to cook under. They cut me off the WPA because they said I was too old to work. They told us old folks we need not put down our walking sticks to get work because they just won't going to put us on. Well, I had some tomatoes cooked without any grease for my breakfast. I had a loaf of bread yesterday, but I eat it. I ain't got any check from old age pension, and I had nothing to eat, and I'm hungry now. You understand that this is uh, Social Security was out at that particular time, but men like Andrew Boone did not qualify for it. I ain't got no check from the old age pension, and I ain't had nothing to eat, and I'm hungry. I just looks to God. I sat down by the road thinking about how to turn and what to do to get a meal when you come along. I thanks you for this time, this dime. I guess God made you give it to me. I was glad to take you down to my living place to give you my story. This shelter or an old tobacco barn is better than no home at all. I is a man to myself and I enjoy it out here if I could get enough to eat. Well, the big show is coming to town. It's the devil's work. Yes, sir, it's the devil's work. Why them show folks can make snakes and make them crawl too. There was one in Watson Field in the edge of Raleigh not long ago, and he made snakes and made them crawl too. All shows is the devil's work. I ain't never done anything for myself in my life. I always worked for the rebels. I stuck right to 'em. Didn't have no sense for doing that, I guess. One time a rebel saw a Yankee with one eye, one leg, and one arm. The Yankee was a begging. The rebel went up to him and gives him a quarter. Then he backed off and just stood looking at the Yankee. Presently, he went back and gave him another quarter, then another, then another. And he said, you take this whole dollar. You is the first Yankee I ever seen trimmed up just to my notion. So take all this. Just take the whole dollar. You is trimmed up to my notion. I belonged to Billy Boone in slavery time. He was a preacher. He lived on an own plantation in Northampton County. The plantation was near Woodland. The nearest river to the place was the Roanoke. My old missus' name was Nancy. When old master died, I stayed around with first one, then another of the children, 'cause master told me just before he died for me to stay with any of them I wanted to stay with. All them old people done dead and gone on. Niggas had to go through the thick and thin in slavery time with rough rations most of the time, with just enough clothing to make out with. Our houses was built of logs and covered with slabs. They was ribbed out of blocks of trees about 3 to 6 and 8 feet in length. The chimneys was built of sticks and mud, then a coat of clay and mud daubed over it. The cracks in the slave house was dug with mud too. We worked from sun to sun. If we had a fire in the cold weather, we was we was working master or the overseer would come and put it out. And we frozen meat and bread many times in cold weather. After the day work in the field was over, we had a task of picking them seed from cotton till we had 2 ounces of lint or spent 2 ounces of cotton on a spinning wheel. I spun counting on a spinning wheel. That's the way people got clothes in slavery time. I can't read and write, but they learned us how to count. They learned us to count this way. Art is an art and a figure is a figure. All for the white man and nothing for the nigger. Had you heard people count that way? They sold slaves just like people sell horses now. I saw a lot of slaves sold on the auction block. They would strip them stark naked. A nigger scarred up and wailed and welted up was considered a bad nigger and did not bring much. If his body was not scarred, he brought a good price. I saw a lot of slaves whipped, and I was whipped myself. They whipped me with the cat of nine tails. It had 9 lashes on it. Some of them slaves was whipped with a cobble paddle. They had 40 holes in them and when you was buckled to a barrel, they hit your naked flesh with that paddle, and everywhere that was a hole in that paddle would draw the blister. When the whipping with the paddle was over, they took the cat of nine tails and busted them blisters. By this time, the blood sometimes would be running down the heels. Then the next thing was a wash in salt water strong enough to hold up an egg. Slaves was punished that way for running away and such. If you was out without a pass, they sure get you. Their patrollers sure looked after you. They would come to the house at night to see who was there. If you was out of place, they would wear you out. Sam Joyner, a slave, belonged to Master. He was running from the patrollers and he fell in the old well. The patrollers went after Master. Master told them to get old Sam up and whip him just as much as they wanted to. They got him out of the well and he was all wet and muddy. Sam began taking off his shoes, then he took off his pants and he got in his shirt tail. Master, he says, what you talking, what you taking off your clothes for, Sam? Sam, he say, Master, you know you all can't whip this nigga right over all these wet clothes. Then Sam lit out. He run so fast he nearly flew. The patrollers got on their horses and running, but they could not catch him. He got away. Master got Sam's clothes and carried him to the house. Sam slipped up next morning, put his clothes on, and the master said no more about it. I was a great big boy when the Yankees come through. I was driving a 2-mule team and doing other work on the farm. I drove a 2-horse wagon when they carried slaves to market. I went to a lot of different places. My master was a preacher, Billy Boone. He sold and bought niggers. He had 50 or more. He worked the grown niggers in 2 squads. My father was named Andrew Boone and my mother was Sarah Boone. Master Boone whipped them with the paddle and the cat of nine tails and used the salt bath, and that was enough. Plenty beside him whipped that way. Master had 1 son named Solomon and 2 girls, Elsie and Alice. My mother had 4 children, 3 boys and 1 girl. The boys were named Sam, Walter, Andrew. That's me, and the girl was Cherry. My father had several children because he had women besides mother, Molly and Lila Lassiter. Uh, 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 two two sisters was also his woman. These women was given to him, and no other man was allowed to have anything to do with them. Molly and Lila both had children by him. Their names are Jim and Molly, Liza, Rosa, Pete, and I can't remember no more of them. The Yankees took just what they wanted, and nothing stopped them because the surrender had come. Before the surrender, the slave owners began to scatter the slaves about from place to place to keep the Yankees from getting them. If a Yankee took a place, the slaves there nearby was moved to a place further off. All I done was for them rebels. I was with them, and I just done what I was told. I was afraid of the Yankees because the rebels had told us that the Yankees would kill us. They told us that the Yankees would bore holes in our shoulders and work us to carts. They told us that we would be treated a lot worse than they was treating us. Well, the Yankees got here, but they treated us fine. Then the story went round and round. The master would have to give the slaves a mule and 40 years and a year's provision and some land, about 40 acres. But that was not so. They never did give us anything. When the war ended and we was told we was free, we stayed on with the master because we had nothing and nowhere to go. I moved from farm to farm. Mother died, and father married Maria Edwards after the surrender. He did not live with any of his other slave wives that I know of. I've worked as a hand on the farm most of the time since the surrender, and Daddy worked most of the time as a hand, but he had a garden and patches most everywhere he worked. I've worked in New York City for 15 years with Crawford and Benhay in the show business. I advertised for them. I dressed in a white suit, white shirt, white straw hat, and wore tan shoes. I had to be a pretty boy. I had to have my shoes shine twice a day. I lived at 18 Manila Lane, New York City. It is between McDougal Street and 6th Avenue. I married Clara Taylor in New York City. We had 2 children. The oldest one lives in New York. The other one died and is buried in Raleigh. In slavery time, they kept you down, and you had to work. Now I can't work, and I'm still down. Not allowed to work and still down. It's all hard, slavery and freedom. Both bad when you can't eat. The old bees make the honeycomb, the young bees make the honey. Niggas make the cotton and the corn, and the white folks get the money. There was a case in slavery time, and it's the case now. The niggas do most of the hard work on their farms now, and the white folks still get the money that the niggas' labor makes. And that is the end of Friday's edition of the Black Man Who Reads Aloud. Remember to join us on Sunday, August 15th at 1 o'clock. Take care and have a great day.